welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. If you are watching us on YouTube, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by our faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. And we are joined by none other than Olivia Troye, who you might remember. She is the former White House Homeland Security, Counterterrorism, and COVID Advisor to Vice President Pence, and is now the director at the Republican Accountability Project. So welcome back, Olivia.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're super glad that you're here. And I was telling our other guests. So this is the second in a 2-part series of just asking folks like what they remember about 9/11. The first person we had on was Olivier Knox from the Washington Post. And I have you now, Olivia Troye. And if I could go back in time, I wouldn't have chosen two people that had almost identical names. Because on a couple occasions I called Olivia, and I'm sorry, Olivier, for that. So I'll apologize to you in advance, just in case I inadvertently call you Olivier. So please don't be upset.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I did have a very, very good friend in college whose name was Olivier. He was from France, and he was doing a 1-year exchange at Penn with me. And we lived in the same hall. Same floor, same building. And we became best friends. So we confused everyone. So, and when he did introduce himself, he did say, "Oh, my name's Olivier." And I was like, "No, I'm actually Olivia." And we had like a 5-minute conversation of back and forth. And I was like, "No, you say it Olivia." And he said Olivier. And I was like, "Olivia." We had a little bit of argument. And then he was like, "My name is Olivia." And then he spelled it for me. And I was like, "Right, dense American. Sorry, French guy."
Yeah, it would have been at some point in time. I was considering asking both of you guys if you wanted to just team up to kind of talk about your experiences, and then I thought that is a horrible idea because it's like if I was going to have Olivier and Olivia, we might as well record it like at the Olive Garden. Olivia. Anyway, that's a horrible dad joke, but we're not here to talk about names. So we're here to talk about 9/11, and we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. It's been a wild ride for a lot of us. With the first part of our series, we had asked Olivier kind of like where he was on 9/11, and he was actually covering George Bush at Sarasota at the education event, which we thought, if you remember the infamous sitting,
when they walk
reading
in
to
and
the
talk
kids.
to him.
He was there. and I'm curious on like where were you on 9/11?
I was actually on Capitol Hill. So I was actually at the Republican National Committee headquarters because that's where I was working at the time. And I had just actually left. I had walked over because I was a junior staffer there, and I just walked over a package to the Capitol. So I was actually in the Capitol when it was all sort of unfolding. Yeah. So as you can imagine, there was just a lot of confusion and chaos. I just remember being evacuated. Like I just remember everybody running in the hallways because we didn't know where that flight was going. There's just so many confusing reports about what was happening, right? I mean, I don't think anybody knew at the moment what was actually developing. So I remember running out of the building and the U.S. Capitol Police just like escorting and trying to point everyone in the right direction and trying to keep everyone somewhat calm, but saying move, like you've got to move now, fast.
Wow. That's amazing.
So were you? I guess what was a general feeling that okay, planes are hitting, or did you even know that planes were hitting at that time? And then was there a concern that a plane was going to come hit the Capitol?
So we knew we had just seen. I think we were aware that a plane had hit one of the towers at the time, and so. But that's I think actually I don't think I know that has happened because I'm out and about. And so I think all I know is that we're being evacuated and everyone is confused, I think, because I don't think that there had been such a rush at the U.S. Capitol in that way, or at least not for many of us who had been, younger staffers. And so I think I realized that when I get back to my desk at work, because I go back to my desk, I actually run all the way back to our building, and because I don't know what else to do, right? And I'm just like, well, I'm just going to go back to figure out what's happening and talk to the team or someone and be around people that are familiar and let them know that everybody's running out of the Capitol. Little, unknown to me that they were watching the TV or the reports, the breaking headlines on what was happening. And so I walk in and I see everyone just gathered around the TV, and I'm completely confused. And I remember looking up, and then we knew that the Pentagon, shortly right after the Pentagon gets hit, and everybody, and so at that point everyone's running from our building, because we're really, the campaign committees are actually right on Capitol Hill as well, especially the RNC. They're right next door to one of the House buildings. So I just remember everyone being gone. I remember my direct boss at the time, he was in Alaska. And I remember him, I guess when he gets woken up, I remember him trying to reach me, calling my desk and saying, do you know what's going on? We're in shock out here. And so I said, no, I know what you know. And yeah. And I remember, the one thing I so vividly remember is our cell phones. No one's cell phone worked. All the signals were jammed. And I just remember, for those of us that did have cell phones, nothing was getting through. And so my parents were down in Texas. My dad was still alive at the time, which we can talk about. That's, 9/11 is always kind of a weird time for me, because it's not only the emotion of 9/11, but I also end up losing my dad 2 months after it.
Oh my word.
The same year. So this will be the 20th anniversary of his death. And so it's just a lot to process around that time. But I remember my parents couldn't get a hold of me. My roommate couldn't get a hold of me. And she knew that I was around the Capitol. So she's also confused, right? Because there's all these conflicting reports. So she's freaking out because she's worried about me. And I just remember walking to a friend's house, trying to use her landline phone to call my mom. And then walking home from that area, can you believe this, all the way out to Arlington, Virginia, to Boston, past the Pentagon, because I couldn't get a cab. I didn't want to get on the metro because I was scared. I didn't know what was going on. And then I just remember walking past the Pentagon and seeing the smoke and the smell. I'll never forget the smell. I think that's what a lot of people on 9/11, especially in New York and everything, smell, and your senses are a powerful thing. And I don't think that I ever forgot what that smell was like. It was just so striking and different. I remember crossing by foot the bridge, walking all the way home. I remember my roommate sobbing when I knock on the door, and she opens the door, and there I am. And I just remember her grabbing me and hugging me and being like, "You're okay." And then we just sat. I think I got PTSD from watching the videos on the news over and over and over. I realized that I needed to stop watching it, because I was watching the people in the buildings. I was watching them run in New York City, and I started getting nightmares, because I was so taken in by it that I had watched it so much day and night for several days afterwards, that I think I traumatized myself. There's something about those images where I really took it in. Randomly, the human aspect, I also remember being the only one at the Ford dealership the day after, because my dad, being a practical Texan and truck driver, says, you don't have a car, and I know you're trying to be, he said this, believe it or not, he says to me, you're trying to be a hippie and save the environment. He also used to make fun of me and be like, what Republican is a hippie trying to save the environment? He's like, that's funny. A contradiction at the time. But here I was. And so he says, I want you to go get a car so that you can get out of there if you need to immediately. And I remember being at the Ford dealer, and I think everybody was very confused, because nobody was buying a car on September 12th. And there I am, 20-something-year-old walking in.
What is going on?
Yeah. And they're just looking at me. And I was like, my father said that I have to get a car now. And I can't afford much, so I'll take the smallest, cheapest, lowest end model you can, because I'm a hill stepper and I'm not making a lot of money right now. So I got to figure this out. And, we came from very humble means. So it's just things that you remember like that, right? And just thinking, how that impacts you. And I do remember thinking, as much as I love politics and campaigning, I've I want to be part of whatever the response is to this so that this never happens again, or that I'm working to prevent it from happening again, which is how I end up sort of kicking off my career in national security, which I think a lot of people who really kind of experience that sort of ended up making that career decision as well, or certainly a lot of my colleagues did.
So what was that like, moving out from the job that you had there, moving into national security? Like, how did that, from what you understand with maybe the people that have been in it before you, like, how did that change how, like, what the national security ecosystem or, community, how did that change the community?
No, I think that's a great question, because I think what was definitely striking to me is that so I ended up I was an early political appointee, but I really went out of my way to say I want to go work at the Pentagon. That's because that image was so striking and just ingrained in my head, that I was like, I'm not a military officer. I actually thought about joining the military at the time. But then my father passes, and then I realized, like, I'm an only child. So my mom, all she had was me. And I was like, I can't do that to her right now. That would be just too much. Fast forward to 2003, and what do? I deploy, and she also did not enjoy that phone call, but as a civilian. But it was a little bit of time passed. But I think just what really was striking to me is that seeing a lot of colleagues and military officers and reservists that I was coming across who were from different careers, who had made significant changes. I remember one person in particular. He had been an investment banker working on Wall Street. And I just remember that he was like, he had signed up for the reserves, and he was now working in the Pentagon, and he wanted to work in policy and intel, right? And he gave it all up. And look, you don't, it's no secret, you don't really match the salary of investment banking when you're working in public service. It's a very big change. But I do remember a lot of individuals like that who came from very diverse backgrounds, who really said, I just felt a calling, and I just was so committed. And I just want to do whatever I can, apply whatever skill set I have, and learn and really commit to a life of public service at this time, and figure out how we get better at this. And in terms of the intelligence apparatus, it was hard. I think I started in the Pentagon earlier on, so it was more on the policy side of the house. But I think everyone had this feeling of, we failed. And that was just very hard. And I think that takes years of the community. I mean, of course, you have the 9/11 Commission and everything to identify where the gaps were, what happened. And I think we learned a lot from it, and we grew significantly as a national security community in terms of agencies talking to each other, and breaking down a lot of the silos that existed beforehand. It was just more of a sort of figuring out where the gaps were, and how the community kind of would come together. I think we've come a long way. I do think so today, in terms of counterterrorism, and the lessons learned from that 20 years later.
What's so weird about your story is that I remember, so in 9/11, I was like a senior in college. I was still working on a degree in psychology and music. Don't ask me why the two don't really blend, but after the attacks, that December, and actually I should preface this, when I was in college, I was a hippie. So like, even though even though you were faking it, I was a raging liberal. I mean, I had a big afro. I would wear like tie-dye shirts. I mean, if you could only imagine, like,
you didn't do any drugs though, right?
That's a different podcast. but like in December, I remember going to the recruiting station and talking to the recruiter and saying, I want to be a part of the solution. I want to do something. I just felt moved, and so I went and enlisted. And I was at the recruiter. Like a month later, I was at the MEP station, raising my hand. And I remember at the recruiting station, the recruiter's like, okay, so what do you want to do? Like he sees this big hippie, right? You know, and I did pretty well on my ASVAB score. And he's like, oh, so what do you want to be? Like a linguist? You want to be an officer? Blah, 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 blah. You know, you want to go to Germany? I was like, no, I want to be in the infantry. And he's like, what? Like, you know, with your ASVAB score, people don't go in the infantry, you know, they just don't. And I was like, I don't know. That's just what I want to do. So I did it. I signed up as an 11 Bravo. Went to Fort Benning in February, finished basic training, got assigned to second ID at Fort Lewis, Washington. And in 2003, I was deployed to Iraq. I think you and I were probably there at the same time. Like I landed our first FOB was in Balad, which is just down the street from Baghdad. I think was where you were at. and,
Yeah.
and the fob was like no bigger than, I don't know, probably no bigger than like my house. So it was
Tiny.
a small little fob. It was tiny. And you know, and I just think to myself, like, that's the story of a lot of Americans. Like you talk about having kind of PTSD of just seeing those images. And I just think that like all of those that are old enough to remember those images, like this is like a real sensitive, impactful time that has, like, you ask anybody what their 9/11 story is and they'll tell you the day, time, place, what they were wearing, you know, like, and it's just like, it's something else. And I'm wondering, like, how much of that did you know, carry with you kind of throughout your career as, you know, working in like the national security space? Like, was that sort of like your nexus event, the thing that you just used to motivate yourself to say, this is not going to happen again?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, it was just sort of me, just being very mission driven. And so I think that every assignment I took was very focused on that. And, you know, after the Pentagon, I actually I ended up working at the National Counterterrorism Center for several years. And I actually did work on Al Qaeda planning, operational planning to counter Al Qaeda. And so I spent about 3.5 years really focused on that, and also working for the director at the National Counterterrorism Center for quite some time, who remains a mentor to me now, and who I learned a lot from at the time. And I think that really molded my career from there. And, you know, I really was very fortunate that I got to see a lot of things as a junior staffer at a very senior level. I just happened to really get lucky to serve on, you know, as a junior person in very senior level offices. So I did get to work in the policy shop at the Pentagon, which is obviously one of the most powerful, interesting places to be, where a lot of these decisions are made. And so I was working in the Pentagon when Afghanistan sort of starts up. I was there for the beginning of detention operations, and I was there for Iraq. And that's how I ended up in Iraq and Baghdad with Paul Bremer. And I was actually his junior staffer, or the gatekeeper, I guess is what they would call me. So I sat out right outside his door. Yeah.
The gatekeeper.
Yeah.
That's a good nickname.
You start somewhere, right? And that was, I was very fortunate that that was the assignment I ended up in. But yes, definitely the gatekeeper. I always tell people, be kind to the junior staff, because they can make or break you.
They're the ones who get you. Like, I've always thought, like, hey, you're never going to get to the person, but you can get to the person that knows the person, or maybe the person who knows the person who knows the person, you know. That's awesome. You know, so when I imagine counterterrorism, I imagine like 24, you know, and I imagine like you have like you have access to, you know, real-time data, like the terrorist is on 32nd Street and you're like there and you're like waterboarding. No, wait, you don't do that. You're like trying to get
that wasn't my role.
You didn't officially do that. Yeah, we won't say anything. So you're trying to get the information out of them or whatever, and so or like the mythology we talked about in another podcast, the previous one with Olivier, like the mythology of the White House, the Oval Office, where like, you know, someone's calling president, we have this situation right now, you need to make a decision. What are the nuclear codes, you know, and they're trying to figure everything out. So think about that, like if we look at this mythology or the Hollywood version, um, what was that like compared to like what life was really like in counterterrorism, and even like what is counterterrorism, and why should we as Americans want to have counterterrorism even as a part of what we do as a country?
Yeah, it's like I'll say it's somewhat like that, what you see on 24. I don't know if it's as glamorous as it looks, or as high speed, but there's certainly some similarities. I can tell you, I remember when the cast of 24 came to NCTC, to the National Counterterrorism Center, because they
Nice.
modeled it after it. So to a certain extent, it's fairly accurate on how it looked. We did have all the TV screens and the operation center, and I remember when that happened, and I forget the one name of the actress, because I remember one of them came up and they were like, "Oh, if you're in that role, you must be," and I forget the name of the woman, but it's a lead actor in it. And I was like, "Yeah, I guess that is my role. Yeah, it's not as cool as that looks on TV, but yeah, I guess that would be me if I were actually doing those things in real time,
That's
somewhat." But
awesome.
for the most part, I mean, it does. There is a lot of communication like that when there is a threat stream that is credible, and that the community is tracking, and it really is a coordinated sort of mechanism, where it's all of the agencies coming together immediately, and it's who's going to take action, whose jurisdiction does it fall under, is it especially if it's domestic, because we're always looking at overseas threats, but also looking at the ties there to prevent an attack domestically here, right? And so, and we're also protecting our embassies and military bases. We're all, U.S. assets overseas. That's all part of the equation. And I think, yes, those meetings, that we kind of civitas, those secure video teleconferences where you see the president on the screen, that is real. All of that happens, and they happen at a moment's notice. Sometimes I remember, sometimes speeding, don't tell the police, down the parkway when I would get notice that something was happening and I had to get in and prep and be ready for the boss to walk in ahead of time. And so I had that role, and it's completely stressful because that every minute matters, right now when that threat, because it's sort of you're racing against the bad guys and trying to prevent this. And I think, the community, in terms of counterterrorism, really comes together on that when it comes to foreign and global terrorist groups. Now, domestic terrorism is a separate topic, which we can talk about if you want, but that is a very different sort of mechanism. But I think in terms of counterterrorism, why it matters, because these are real threats, and these are global networks that are out there that actually are transnational at times in many ways, or can be regional overseas. Um, but at the end of the day, I mean, the bottom line is that, um, our job is to protect the security of Americans and their safety, right? And I think it matters, for Americans to really kind of understand that, even though, we've had a presence overseas, I know, and, we've just pulled out of Afghanistan, regional stability around the world does matter. And what you don't want is to create, you know, opportunities for, countries to become sort of the safe havens for these types of groups, where they train and they operate there and they recruit. But a lot of that, to be honest, is also done now, thanks to the power of technology and social media. So we have people being radicalized online. So it's really sort of, I would say that the threats that we had in the past, they're still there, but I guess the way the threat has evolved has been significant. And so technology can be used for good, and it can be good used for bad, right? We have technology now, and I'm talking to you all, and we're in two different places. But unfortunately, the bad actors use the technology as well.
That's really interesting, and I'll apologize in advance. My dog is barking in the background. I think he was trying to communicate with your dog.
I think so too. Sorry.
But I do want to sort of focus in on the domestic terrorism part, because I find it interesting. When you read the 9/11 Commission report and all the different books and articles that were written about it, it seemed as if there was a certain, I don't know, like ubiquitous level of unpreparedness, like for the attack on our soil. And there were sort of like whispers about Al Qaeda, and there were, these other, maybe entities that knew something, but there wasn't like a cohesive, thing to kind of put it all together, so to speak. And I'm curious if there's any. I mean, it's hard for me to say that we've really come a long way, especially in, the midst of what happened on January 6th at the Capitol. It's like, how did we miss that? Like it's clearly obviously wasn't to the same extent that 9/11 was, but it seemed like it was a pretty big, miss from the intelligence community, from the counterterrorism entities and whatnot. So like, can you either, talk about that? Like, am I wrong to compare the two? Are they two completely different animals? And what do you think about that with regards to domestic terrorism, comparing the two events?
In some ways, they are two different sort of, I guess, mechanisms on how we counter global terrorism, counterterrorism versus domestic terrorism. And I will say that I actually was kind of surprised. I found that it was very eye-opening to be sitting in the White House working on Homeland Security on some of these threats. Having been a global counterterrorism practitioner for a really long time until I went to DHS and really focused more on the Homeland, that is when I started to really notice the disparity between, now we have the National Counterterrorism Center. They work very closely with the FBI and the CIA. I mean, there is sort of a combined, unifying, cohesive approach to this that really is a collaboration, so to speak, where all of these threats kind of come into one. There's a lot of, I think the community is well versed in sort of following those threat streams. I will say when it comes to domestic threats, it's a lot harder. And so on January 6th, if we look at it from that perspective, I don't think that it was an intelligence failure, to be honest. Actually, I mean, it just wasn't. All of the intelligence was there. Like I was outside of the community and I was tracking threats online and I was seeing it myself and I had mapped it out and I was taking steps to protect my own family. And I had been very vocal. I remember about 2 weeks before, I had been very vocal publicly. I'd been on media. Believe it or not, I got the threats for being vocal. I got the "we're not violent, we're not going to be violent." But and those are always the best messages. I'm not violent, but when I see you and find you, I'm going to kill you. And I'm like, okay, you're not violent though. Got it. Okay, I'm going to close the blinds and the shutters now. Thank you very much.
Yes.
But I, and so I think that all of the signs were there. I think it was a failure to act upon the intelligence, which is something that I think we really need to work on in terms of how we will proceed with domestic threats. And it's hard. There are a lot of keyboard warriors out there, as we call them, where, what is an actual threat? When does it actually become something that they follow up on? And I think that that is something that DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, and FBI are going to continue to struggle with going forward. I think we're not quite there yet in terms of domestic threats like we are in terms of overseas threats. That's just a reality of it. I think we see them, and I think we're really good at tracking some of them, but we're very siloed. There's no NCTC per se for domestic, right? And so I think is something that needs to be looked upon. And like I think it's going to be harder. I think we've got a lot of First Amendment rights and we've got freedom of speech and we've got a lot of challenges that I think the community will face in terms of how we will look at social media and doing social media checks domestically, and what does that mean, and how do you follow up on that, and without getting pushback from the public. And so I think these are all conversations that are important that will need to be had. I actually really strongly believe in the January 6th Select Committee. I wanted it to be a commission, but unfortunately that's what it is. But I do think that we learned a lot from the 9/11 Commission, and I'm hopeful that the January 6th Select Committee will have recommendations that will help us in terms of the Homeland Security enterprise. I think that will be incredibly helpful. Politics aside, whatever happens that led to January 6th, I think it'll be important to really learn from that day in terms of what happened between law enforcement and intelligence agencies, and really find sort of the gaps so that we know what we have a better understanding. Because I think that's after 9/11, that's really what we did. We became a community that really kind of figured out where did we fail. And I think that's an important thing that I think the committee can probably do.
I I was thinking about this committee that's being made for the January 6th event, and even thinking about the commission that came out of 9/11 and the events that happened there, the difference between domestic and global terrorism. I can imagine that dealing with domestic terrorism, one of the major differences is you're dealing with citizens, or if you are dealing with U.S. citizens, that creates um, a greater degree of care. You have to honor the Constitution, and I don't know how many constitutional rights are given to global terrorists, if any. But I know that as American citizens, you're supposed to be able to have the Constitution behind you, and you can speak to that however you want to. But I guess my question is that how is it that, like, what the tension, help us understand the tension that's inherent between, you know, like, say, for example, the Patriot Act, or the Department of Homeland Security that was created, and America now, the intelligence community necessarily maybe spying on its own citizens, things like that. What kind of tensions has that created between the Constitution, the civil liberties of Americans, and balancing the safety, and the charge of, the government to maintain peace and tranquility, both domestic and foreign? Where do you see that tension rising, and how do we, in your mind, solve it?
Yeah, I think that I think their attention is significant. And I think, honestly, I think it is a significant obstacle to countering what we're seeing on the rise of domestic terrorism of extremists here. And I think I'm very concerned about, we're a very divided country right now, and with a lot of grievances. There's a lot of hate, unfortunately. And I think it's only getting worse, and unfortunately. And I think that that drives a greater possibility for violence. I come at this from the perspective that I can't tell you how many numerous mass shootings I worked on during my tenure as a Homeland Security Advisor. The aftermath, it was awful. I remember every single one of them, and I remember some of them specifically that were tied to white supremacist manifestos or that sort of hatefulness, right? And I worked on synagogue shootings, the aftermath of the Tree of Life synagogue, and what happened there. And I, even a mass shooting in my own hometown of El Paso, where that was certainly some of the undertones. And I think that the tension, I think, is going to remain significant in terms of privacy rights and how do we maintain that. And I think it's going to have to, it'll be a tough conversation, but I think it's going to come down to the US government, in some ways, I would say, building trust as well with the public, and making sure that we have boundaries on how we will approach this, and boundaries on protecting the privacy of Americans, because obviously that's critical. We are the United States and we have our US Constitution. But I think, other countries honestly are light years ahead of us in terms of countering their own domestic threats, because they don't have a lot of the challenges that we will face in terms of this topic. And it is hard. And I will tell you, a lot of the time there is a lot of chatter in social media, and we'll come to find out after an attack that that person posted on social media. And so the question is, how do we counter things like that when the warnings are there, and how do you flag that? And I'm not saying that that work necessarily isn't happening, but it's going to become, I think, a more prominent conversation. But the counter to that, to be candid, is how do you do that in a world right now where people are increasingly becoming anti-government? And there's a lot of doubt. And I think that is what worries me, because when you start to lose the public trust in your government institutions, I think that leads us down a really dark path in terms of our democracy. And so I'm very concerned about, I've hoped that many people, maybe leaders that are sort of leading us down that path, start to have a moment of realization that what's happening here is not, it's not just political rhetoric. You're actually eroding at the fibers of our democracy here. And we need to be able to have these honest conversations about what's happening here. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that really answers your question. It's a complicated topic.
It is.
Yeah, and I want to quiz you real fast because I just learned something about the Patriot Act, the USA Patriot Act. Like, I did not know that was an acronym.
Oh.
and I'm curious if you know what that acronym stands for. I wrote it down just so I made sure I got it right. Do you know off the top of your head or remember
Probably
what
not.
the
No. I've actually haven't worked on the Patriot Act in quite a few years now, actually, to be honest with you.
So for our listeners, it is the Uniting and Strengthening America, the USA part, by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. So that is the USA Patriot Act, which I am very impressed by their ability to form words.
Yeah.
To form a word. like that is like whatever staffer developed that.
They should get a raise, or should have gotten a raise.
Yeah, they need to be a speechwriter. They probably are. I don't know, but the last question I want to ask you about 9/11 is, so today, I think it was today or yesterday, the mastermind of the 9/11 attack, the Khalid Sheik Mohammed, who was captured in 2003 in Pakistan, is still or presently about to go to trial. I mean, it's like 17 years or so, and I'm curious, like why would the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks, like have 17 years basically to I don't know, think about what he's done, and is it and wait for trial? I mean, I don't understand the legal system enough to know how all that kind of like plays in, and I'm curious if you can maybe help explain it.
Yeah, I mean, those trials have been very cumbersome and it's been a long system. And so there's pros and cons to it. I think there's a lot of personal opinions on whether that system was broken or not or fair. And I think there's probably good arguments on both aspects of it, to be honest with you. And I think someone like him, the issue with him is that although he's probably not in the mix, obviously, because he's been off the grid and off the radar for so long, that the sources and the connections and network is probably, those are gone. We're not looking at him for that, and that's gone. But I think the problem with someone like him, is that there's a whole population out there where he still remains an inspiring figure, probably, and I think that is where, um, you need to. I think that's where the rub is, I guess I would say, is that here is someone who is a symbol, to those who may subscribe to that thinking. And the question is, I think the world will be watching. There's a certain population out there will be paying close attention, to what happens, with this individual. And these are all. There's no easy answer, on a lot of these things. Certainly, I'm aware of detention operations, and there was a lot of concern at the time, and rightly so, of what happens when you return these people. These people return to the countries. Will they engage in the fight? Some of them do, some of them don't. Are they rehabilitated? Some of them are, some of them aren't. So those are all fair questions. I think the thing for someone like him is he was such a big figure in this massive terrorist attack that succeeded, that I think when you look at him, is it someone who is still viewed as this sort of martyr and idol, because that's kind of the tendency for many of these groups. But if you shift over to Afghanistan, you're watching Haqqani being, being part of the official I guess, Taliban government and getting appointed. Haqqani is a terrible guy. He is a very dangerous individual, um, who is not just a terrorist, but he's just corrupt. I mean, he's just a criminal. And so, all of these people play a role in terms of recruitment and the people that look up to him. So I think that'll be sort of an interesting trial to kind of see. But, I think, he's also getting hopefully what I think is a fair trial, whether it's been a long process or not, and hopefully is being treated humanely. Like, I can only speak to, I had the International Committee for the Red Cross portfolio, so I was a big advocate for humane treatment. I think we are, um, we aspire to set a certain standard that many do not get that around the world. And I hope I was one of the advocates that advocated to have Korans there because it was the right thing to do. And I know you guys come from a place of faith, so I just wanted to, that's why I mentioned that, because it's faith,
and to that end, I
important.
remember Neil Gorsuch actually ruled on a detainee issue once because he needed food requirements, and one of his jail, in one of the prisons he was in. I can't remember the name of the person, but I remember reading about some of the rulings of Neil Gorsuch before he was a Supreme Court justice, and he heavily ruled in favor of religious freedoms and rights. And this Muslim person that needed a special diet, got it because of Gorsuch ruling. So I think that's, I'm totally with you. But we do have a couple other questions about Afghanistan, but I do want to at least just ask you just one thing about the withdrawal, and what does that mean for things like DoD spending, or the future of the NDAAs, or other sort of organizations, DHS was formed after 9/11. So as a result, we all had to take off our shoes and take our laptops out of our bags and stuff like that. Do you see the withdrawal having any effect on any of the things I just mentioned?
I don't think so. I think, we've certainly spent enough money there. I think I actually had lost track of how much money we had spent there until recently. I found that kind of shocking. I mean, I knew it was a lot, but to see the numbers, both in cost of dollars and in also cost of life, is not lost on me at all. And, I think, one thing I will say is, you can judge the withdrawal. I know there are a lot of strong opinions on that, on whether it was how it was conducted and what happened, whether we, failed to see things or expect things. But in terms of the national security community and what this withdrawal means, I think regionally it could definitely lead to instability, and we're seeing that kind of play out a little bit. But the community, actually, when it comes to the threat of what's happening there, I think has come a long way. And so I'll just speak to that and say, in terms of the intelligence community and those threats, I don't think that we're not going to regress back to where we were pre 9/11, because that community and mechanism that was built after DHS and the National Counterterrorism Center and a lot of the fixes that were there remain in place and will remain in place. And we've gotten so much better at screening and vetting. And when you talk about, the precautions that we've taken with with TSA and DHS, I don't think anything really changes on that. I think the threat streams will remain, and the community will continue to function the way it always has. I do think that we're more resilient when it comes to really understanding um, foreign travel to the United States. Foreign traveling, we have a pretty good idea of who's coming in and out. We do great screening and vetting. Knock on wood. I don't, I won't say, it's 100% foolproof, but it's pretty solid. It's way light years ahead of pre 9/11. So I think in that respect, we're safer. We're safer than we were back then. Now, in terms of, I don't see it really impacting any changes in terms of the way people travel now. I'm actually more concerned about people traveling domestically right now, to be honest with you. I mean, case in point, we saw a lot of people travel to the Capitol on January
Yeah.
6th. unfortunately, I'm from Texas, and I know for a fact that many came from Texas, unfortunately, right? And so that's, when you look at things like that, um, I think that's where I think I worry domestically, in terms of that, and I worry about cyber as well, uh, and and I worry about like critical infrastructure. So I think where we are in terms of countering threats, I don't think that we look away from the war on terrorism, I guess, or countering terrorism or counterterrorism as it is globally. But I do think that there's a certain extent where we do really have to look internally ourselves and kind of, as we discussed, sort of look at that community from that perspective. And I think watching what's happening in Afghanistan for me is heartbreaking in terms of we've spent so many years there and what's happening. I worry about the women in Afghanistan. I worry about the
Yeah.
children and their future. I think it's even harder for them that they've had sort of a taste of some freedom, right, and experiencing what that was like in partnership with the U.S. forces. But I think that watching what is happening, time will tell what the Taliban will do. They're making certain promises and assurances, but actions speak louder than words, and they're certainly not known for being trustworthy and following through on it. So I think that'll be sort of yet to be seen. I do hope that we get our Afghan allies out. Um, I think they served right on the ground next to us. I really think about that a lot. I think that's been hard for a lot of people who have deployed or been on the ground. And we think about those interpreters and translators and the families that really, in my eyes, were no different than myself or people serving on the ground because they really were the lifelines for many of us, and we couldn't have done our jobs without them. And so, I think about them a lot, and I think about welcoming them into communities around the world and what they'll face in a world that's so divided, especially here in the United States. And I think one worry that I have is that I hope that we show compassion and welcoming and love to these families and these refugees that are coming here, um, because I am concerned that I do not want them to feel ostracized
Yeah.
in any way, because they've spent a lot of time in their lives protecting ours and defending America, and we should never forget that.
I I agree with you. I think that one thing that makes America so beautiful is, in all of our faults, is that we have been truly a nation that's overall tried to welcome refugees, things like that. Of course, we haven't done it perfectly, and there's been many, many faults that we've had over the years. But we are a truly multinational nation. And one of the things that I've just been struck in this conversation, especially with this idea of the mastermind behind 9/11 sitting in an American jail cell or whatever is going on for 17 years awaiting trial, versus, say, someone like Soleimani, am I saying his name right? Where we take a drone and we blow him up in a car, in one of our drones, I guess that, what is it? The Hunter? I don't remember what it's called, but it brings those blades out or whatever. That's a pretty crazy way to go, right? Just being basically thrown into a giant fan, and that's attached to a missile. So, when thinking about like contrasting those two things, 17 years, getting a fair trial versus we're just taking this guy out. I guess when I'm thinking about this scenario, and I'm going to ask you a question that is an impossible question to answer, probably, but I like asking those questions because I love hearing the responses. So we're looking at these two different things, and say maybe someone gets, who's to say? Maybe that Taliban, right? They're operating in America, or they have some people that they've brought in and they snuck into being taken as a refugee, and then they come in and they do an act of terror, violence, and then they don't get shot somehow, and they get to go and face a trial where there's other people on foreign soil either being taken out by an American operation or whatever. So with this withdrawal, thinking about this contrast and with this withdrawal, my question is, do you think that the world is a better place with America leaving Afghanistan?
That is a very hard question. Because I can think I'm the type of person that can kind of make arguments for both perspectives, I guess, in some ways.
Sure.
But I think many of us can. I think that, um, and people may get upset when I say this, but uh, I don't think that we do nation building all that well. Maybe that's the
Mm.
understatement of the year. Um,
It's not controversial
and
because it's one that I hold to.
so
So
it's
you're in
very
good company.
trying to be diplomatic here in some ways, but I think that uh, you know, democracy is really hard. I mean, look at what's
Yeah.
happening here in the US. We really got to, it's fragile too. So I feel like you really got to care for it and you really got to, protect it. Um, and I think sort of trying to encourage democracy, which I think is great. And I think that it's wonderful to think of that in a very ideal way. And so we want freedom and we want to promote freedom around the world. There's a noble thing about that, right? There is. And I want that. I want that for those women in Afghanistan. And I want that for women everywhere and children everywhere. And I want them to see a different future. And but the counter to that is some places just aren't built that way. And it's a different culture. And it's not the American mindset. And it's a very different viewpoint and walk of life. And the two are not necessarily complementary to each other, right? And so I don't know. I think the region and that part of the world is probably not a better place now that we're gone. I think it's going to be harder regionally, but I think that after 20 years, we've certainly done a lot to try to make it a better place. And um, I mean, at some point, like, how long are you going to stay? And that's a very hard question to answer, right? And when do you draw the line on it? And I think 20 years is a really long time. And I think that's where, whatever happened along the way and the deals that were cut and made, I feel for those Afghan forces, honestly. And I hope that we didn't sort of betray them by meeting with the Taliban, because honestly, I think that was a pretty big slap in the face, I think, in terms of undermining them and the Afghan government in some ways, because they've been there and then you suddenly go and meet with the people that they have been fighting all along and you're their biggest partner. I don't know the kind of message that you're sending to them,
Are
but
you referring to Trump's agreement, the Trump and Pence's agreement?
yeah, I mean, I was trying not to get too political about it, but I
Oh,
think that
sorry.
that is
Yeah, I'm
hard.
just.
Yeah. I think that was
Right.
not the wisest decision to do because you demoralize them. I think, as someone who's spent time there and seen it, like, what are you saying to those Afghan forces that are with the military on the ground when you go and meet with a group? You sort of legitimize them again, right? And so I feel like you pulled the rug out from under them. And so, history will look back and be like, yeah, that was a good idea. That was a bad idea. I think it's really way too fresh and to really kind of make a true assessment of that, to be honest. And I think there's very strong opinions. Obviously, people have very personal, strong feelings about this. And one thing I will say that worries me is just I think we made a big difference while we were there. Um, and I have no doubt that our military and the people that served there did make a huge contribution. And I would never take that away from any military person or person that served there because I think there were a lot of sacrifices made.
Hmm.
And I
That
worry about that narrative turning on the military on that because I think there's a lot of veterans and a lot of military people out there that sort of are questioning that right now. People that I know personally too. And I think we can't forget to keep that perspective.
Yeah, we had a Green Beret on the show a couple weeks ago. He's actually a really good friend of mine who train a lot of the elite Afghan forces, and it's interesting to hear him talk about it because like he took on some of the responsibility of what he was seeing on the news. He just thought, well, maybe if I trained them harder, maybe if we just stayed longer, you know. And I remember telling him like, it's not your fault, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
I know him as a friend, I know his family, and I said, I know that you did everything you possibly could, and it's hard to watch, but you know, we just have to, you know, we just have to put America first. He voted for Trump too, and you know, and I said like, this is what Trump would have wanted, and and like I
It's what
hate to
Biden
invoke
wanted too, right?
yeah,
I mean,
it's what
he's
Biden
been
wanted too.
wanting this
You're
for a long time. Yeah,
right.
it's
You're
no
right. So
secret that he really has wanted out of this
mhm.
for a long time.
Yeah, it's just Biden just had the political will to do it, and if it cost him in 2024, then so be it, you know. But if it cost him in 2024 and we get Trump again, then I'll probably be really upset. But you know, but it's people like you in the Republican Accountability Project that are gonna keep that from happening. I'm hoping, right? Like, is that
We're gonna
the work you
try.
guys are doing?
We're certainly
Good,
trying, for sure.
good.
And I'm also, eyes and ears open and encouraging um, good people to run
Mhm.
for office. I think there's a need for that. Josh, any consideration? I think that may have come up in our last. You think I forgot, but I did tell you to consider running for office.
No, I don't. I haven't thought about it as much recently. I've been in kind of
Same.
a weird place, but mentally. But now that I'm a little more clear-minded, the
You know,
presidency doesn't sound too bad.
yeah.
Look at that
I
selective
mean,
hearing from Josh in our last podcast, I think.
that's right. Yeah. You know, so last actually one statement and then one last question. So is it Chloe O'Brien from 24?
Oh, that's right. It was Chloe. Yeah.
Okay, good. I had our research team, i.e. me, Googled it as you were talking to I was like, I feel like I know who she's talking about, but okay, Chloe O'Brien. So that's you. You're Chloe O'Brien. Wow, that's really neat. I like 24. So good on you. The last question is, inevitably there is going to be if there's not already, I don't think there is, but there will be a Trump movie that documents the presidency, maybe, you know, the January 6th, the attack on Qasem Soleimani, whatever. Like, when this movie comes out or starts to be filmed, who would you want to play you in the movie?
Wow. I don't know that I would make the cut for the movie, but maybe. Maybe. Man, I don't know. That's a really tough question.
Yeah. I
I have
mean,
no idea. Any
Angelina
suggestions?
Jolie.
Any suggestions?
Maybe it's the lady that played Chloe O'Brien. You can bring her back, you know, like she
Yes.
knows what you do, you know. That may not be a bad one, because I definitely think you would be in the movie. I mean, like you seem to kind of rock the DC world when you decided to leave the White House. So it would be a bad director move to not include your role, but that's just me, you know.
Yeah,
I don't make a movie.
I'm sure the script will include conversations by some of these people that I've heard where we thought she would go away and she just won't go away. She's like the annoying.
She started this other like thing, the Republican accountability. Like what? Like, why won't she just
She's
go
working
away?
with these people. I know, and she's like out recruiting moderate candidates, both on the left and the right. I mean, she's out of control.
Moderates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here I
You know
am.
what
I'm living
really
in the middle
struck
here,
me,
guys. Anybody else want to join me? I know there's a lot of us there in the middle.
like I heard Bill Kristol was actually going to endorse Terry McAuliffe, which I mean, like, so we're in the thick of the Virginia Republican race because Josh and I are both in Virginia, you know, and so I was like, really, Bill Kristol's going to endorse Terry McAuliffe? Because at first I was like, you know, I'll take a look at this Glenn Youngkin and see what he's all about. You know, he doesn't seem too Trumpy, although Trump endorsed him, but. You know, like, who else is he going to endorse? I don't know. What do you think? Who is
He's
the
pretty
Republican
Trumpy.
accountability? Yeah. Oh, he is pretty
Pretty
Trumpy.
Trumpy, huh?
Wow.
He's pretty
Okay.
Trumpy. Yeah.
What
So
an adjective, Trumpy. Did you ever think that would be an
Trumpy.
adjective
No,
that we would use?
actually.
got
No,
it.
it makes me it makes me cringe because I remember people, high school friends who were like, I keep waiting to see you on The Apprentice. And I'm like, well, I guess that kind of came true in some ways. Yeah, I just didn't realize that The Apprentice was coming to the White House.
Yeah,
So there's
you're
that.
fired.
Yeah. Contrary to popular belief, I was not fired, so I did keep my job in this Apprentice.
Yes.
Yeah.
You fired him. There you go. Bam.
There you go.
You can't fire me. I quit. So who would the Republican Accountability Project recommend I vote for governor?
Well, I don't think that we have actually endorsed officially for candidates, so I don't know. If I can speak for RAP, I personally will not be supporting Youngkin.
Okay.
I think that anyone who has those tendencies is a warning to me, and I'm concerned about the direction of that. I'm also concerned about, I prefer candidates to be truthful about where they stand on things. I don't need them going behind our back saying that I'm going to do this and then I'm going to pull a fast one over here, and that's actually documented. So I mean, that says a lot about your character and your integrity of the kind of person you are, that you have to do that. And so that to me is a red flag. And I would say that about a Democrat or a Republican, right? I mean, that's just something that in today's world really bothers me.
So I have a very quick question. In my 20, let's see here, 20, what is it going to be? 2024? Would that, no.
For the president.
Year plus 4, no. 2025 gubernatorial candidacy, will the Republican what accountability
project?
Project. Sorry, I'm forgetting. What you guys endorse?
Call it the RAP.
RAP.
Will I endorse you?
Yes.
We can have a serious conversation about that.
Wow. I think we just made news just now. All right.
Bertram 2025.
Yeah, but if you did endorse them, like, it would be the rapture. Like, you would have to add the chur to the end.
There you go.
Because you endorse. Anyways,
we'd have to sit down and have a serious conversation about where you stand on things, Josh.
All right.
You start to sound a little Trumpy on these podcasts. I'm going to have to really tune in and start paying attention and be like, no. The dark side is taking you in. Walk away. Walk away while you still can.
We'll have a conversation.
That's so funny. All right. Well, hey, thanks, Olivia, so much for spending some time with us. We really appreciate you and just everything you do with RAP and just being a good person. So just thank you for your time.
Yes,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we'll see you guys next week. All right. Bye-bye.